The maxim of the security services, MI5, is the ends justify the means. Pedophiles were agents of the state, and they were allowed to be pedophiles and allowed to do that as long as they gave information that the state found important enough to keep them as agents. Yeah, like, it's hard to know, isn't it? And you're right, we had to be cautious, and certainly we're cautious in the documentary, but what I will say is this, Kincora, the furore around it and the conspiracy theories that have kind of existed and kind of the vacuum information in Kincora, they went on for decades. And what we tried to do was kind of look at that in the cold light of day and go, listen, what can we say as fact, and what's more speculation, and what are the reasons? But when you start to lay things out, why was there such a pushback on people like Colin Wallace and Brian Gemmell? Why was there such a pushback when they tried to intervene? Okay, so that's the first question. So there has to be, MI5 would say, and have said, that they had no involvement whatsoever in Kincora. Like, I just don't think that's credible. They would say that, Colin Wallace and Brian Gemmell, Mike Taylor, never alerted us to any child abuse that went on in Kincora, and couldn't have known, that's just not credible either. So, then you have to ask yourself, well, why has there been such a pushback? And could it be that you have people in that environment that you want to protect? So then we look at the wider kind of context of Northern Ireland, and we see how agents were recruited and then used. So how were agents recruited in Northern Ireland? How are agents recruited anywhere around the world by the British intelligence services or, the American intelligence services? These are things that have been documented by people certainly more kind of learned than I am on this subject. But they use weaknesses to recruit people. So, pedophilia is one of those. We see it in the recent kind of report on Steckknife. Was that how he was recruited potentially? They have this hanging over you, and we kind of use that against people. And now you work for us. Of course, don't forget, Kincora wasn't just a children's home. Kincora was the site where William McGrath was holding power meetings, which were important to the intelligence community. So it figures that potentially there were agents working there, and the only conclusion we could come to in the documentary, speaking to Brian Gemmell and other people, is that William McGrath was very likely an agent. He was recruited first by MI6. Don't forget, MI5 and MI6 both worked in Northern Ireland at various points because of the kind of that cross border into the Republic of Ireland. So MI6 is involved with kind of foreign intelligence, MI5 domestic intelligence. So there was a crossover in Northern Ireland, and what we found out, I suppose, in our research is that it wasn't as if, so there was MI5, there was MI6, there was RUC special branch, there was British Army intelligence. There's probably more than I'm not even thinking of, but it isn't as if all these agencies were totally open with each other and worked together and it was all harmonious. They were competing for agents, they were competing for intelligence. They wouldn't always share the information. So in that environment, William McGrath, to the best of our knowledge, was an agent. This is what Brian Gemmell tells us in the documentary. And he may at some point have switched over from MI6 to MI5 in that environment. And you can see then why people like Colin Wallace and Brian Gemmell were told, you don't investigate this. This is, there's obviously an intelligence operation going on here. It's at a higher level than you are. You don't know about it. So go, and they tried to keep it. Of course, then when the information came out into the public domain in 1980, because of the Irish Independent and a report on the Irish Independent, suddenly, they're left exposed, and they have to then deny that they'd ever been involved in any of this stuff. They would never do that. Of course, they wouldn't. And that's how it happened. But I think the only conclusion is that William McGrath, potentially others, were working as agents, and and that was why they were protected. And of course, what we then kind of go on to lay out in the documentary is, the maxim of the security services, MI5, is the ends justify the means. Now, we're seeing that play out now at the moment with steak knife. The ends justify the means, And the report, John Boucher's report, very clearly states that the ends doesn't justify the means, because more people probably died, than lived because of the security services actions. Okay. And what we're saying in the documentary is exactly the same thing happened here. What we think happened, and to the best of our knowledge, and we lay out the facts as much as we have in the documentary and try and make the most cogent case for the fact that agents, pedophiles were agents of the state, and they were allowed to be pedophiles and allowed to do that as long as they gave information that the state found important enough to keep them as agents, and therefore it was allowed to happen. So that extended to child abuse at Kincora, very likely. Did it also extend to child disappearances and child murder, as in the case of Brian McDermott? And that's where it gets really interesting, because we kind of lay out the links in that case and how that could have came to be and how that might have happened. And, I think for anyone to say at this stage that MI5 weren't involved in Kincora, I would like to see what they're relying on. Are they relying just on MI5 saying they weren't involved in Kincora? Because that's all it would be. I just find it not credible.